All right, Psalm 102. Let's call this one Freedom Without the Side Effects for a People Yet to Be Created. In this psalm, as we mentioned in the sermon, that roughly breaks down around the theme of endurance. It's one of a number of themes we could look at, but we looked at endurance because the psalmist is pouring out his heart to God at a time when he is fully aware of the way in which his strength seems to be failing, in contrast to a God who he notices doesn't get tired that way. And so as he's begging God to hear his prayer and he's pouring out his heart about the ways in which he feels faint, he's acknowledging that God has an endurance level that he does not have. And more importantly, when God acts, he acts to set an example for, as the title says, a people yet to be created. And one of the things we noticed is the psalmist isn't the only one. We talked about a number of things that appreciated temporary success in our society. E-cigarettes blew up, popped for a while, but it became clear that their bubble popped when they were possibly more toxic than the same old cigarettes we always knew. Likewise, things like asbestos, beyond this generation, they go back to a time when products that were the next best thing ended up being the next best thing for a while, only to realize that their success was not going to endure, largely because they were actually harming their clients. And so as the psalmist realizes, there is a season on certain types of success, going back to something we saw around about Psalm 90 when Moses asked God to help me number my days. The wisdom that Moses seemed to display seems super similar to the psalmist in Psalm 102. The thing that we left out, though, is when God is putting on display for a people yet to be created, the fact that there is a season on the type of success that comes at the expense of others. One of the things we realize if we have lived for very long is it doesn't always seem to catch up with everyone in a public way. And so the reason why the psalmist seemed so wise to me was because in asking God to essentially do the same thing that Moses asked, helping me to number my days, he realized that even with my best or with the best of intentions, I am at my best when I understand the season of life that I am in. And just as there was a limit to the number of things or the kinds of things I could get done in my 20s, there's a limit on the kinds of things I can get done in this season of my life. And I am at my best when I function under that realization. Likewise, even though God does not hold all wrongdoing accountable publicly, that does not mean that the season for being shady never comes to an end, because that reminded me of, I think it was an Edgar Allan Poe poem called The Fall of the House of Usher, the story of a house that began to fall long before its collapse. Why? Because the consequences of the wrong that was done to build the house of Usher began to manifest in the misery within the household long before its public fall. And so likewise, even though, like we said, God does not hold all wrongdoing publicly accountable, sometimes the seasons on wrongdoing begin to end privately long before their public manifestations of failure. And so when we look at some of the illustrations that we saw on Sunday about the companies that once had great profits at the expense of the suffering of many folks, they are simply one example of the ways in which God brings seasons of shady ways to an end. Which brings us back to the beauty in Psalm 102 and a psalmist who seems to be begging God not to cut him short in the midst of his days because of the mistakes that he's made, but instead to put him on a path that will allow him to find joy that will endure even beyond this season.